And Ignacio from Peter and Heredia, the Alicante lawyers, are with us today. A little bit demob happy because, of course, in Spain, generally there are holidays in August, aren't there, chaps? Yeah.
Hola, buenas tardes. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Carl.
How's it going? All right?
Very good.
Very good.
Looking forward to holidays.
Yeah. So, final webinar rather, is coming up a little bit later on your website this afternoon at 5:30 mainland Spain. People can sign up for that now. But we're going to have a look at some of the things that you're going to be discussing on buying to let property investment in Spain. Now, and I said to you when I just took, the phrase says to me there are two, maybe three main things to look at here. First of all, the buying of property, then the letting of it, and then the taxes, obviously. But, of course, as we were discussing that, we realised there's a whole other can of worms, I think is the way you put it, Ignacio, about letting and licensing approval and limits on what you may and may not be able to do. We're talking about the Airbnb type properties. That has obviously been raising its head. We've had lots of news stories across Spain on this year. And so a number of towns, a number of principalities, a number of cities deciding on different rules. It's kind of difficult to keep up on which one said what and which one's going to do what. So perhaps we should start right at the beginning, though, and that's buying to let in Spain. It's something that seems to have taken a bit of a downfall in the UK. It used to be quite a big thing, but now apparently it's just not as lucrative as it was due to various reasons. But it's still something that's really happening quite a lot in Spain, isn't it?
Well, yes, actually, at the moment, I think is a hot space here for buying to let, especially on these communities. But I think Madrid as well is very hot and very attractive place to invest. Comunidad Valenciana, Costa del Sol, all of them are very attractive. I think it was because after COVID, people found out, but this is just me guessing, that they could work remotely. And they discover a new place to be.
That's certainly made a big difference, I think, people being able to work abroad.
Let me put some numbers on the table. Some years ago, one of us council mayors in Alicante, he told me that it was needed around 11,000 new rooms or rooms for hotels in the Alicante city per year. So it was a big demand, and it was not enough hotels. And this was not just in Alicante, in all the cities in Spain, but obviously Alicante in Costa Blanca has a big attraction and a big demand.
So it couldn't actually then accommodate all
exactly.
The people that it wanted to bring in.
That's right. So it was a lot of flexibility now on the rules in order to open to investors to let, in this case of digital platforms like Airbnb, in order to attract obviously more tourists, in order to obviously come to this area. Obviously, right now the demand is big, and also the investors are being a lot also. So right now the demand and the offer has been quite good, but it will finish sometimes. I mean,
there's got to be
we'll match the roof.
At some point, you've got to hit the ceiling, haven't you?
Actually, Carl, I will say here the situation where we are is the way I find it is locals. Every time it is, the foreigners are bringing up the price. Yeah. So it's more and more difficult to afford to buy a property. Why? Because people from abroad, let's call it elsewhere, all countries, they find it very attractive, very cheap, and very good for them. So there is a big demand because there is a lot of people out there that are willing to come over here. And locals, because I was noticing the other day, it's hard to find a cheap property.
It's a difference in wages, isn't it?
Yeah.
Northern Europe, America, or the Americas, for instance.
Yeah.
The wages are a lot different there, especially so if people are, becoming digital nomads. That it's very difficult for people locally to keep up because wages are just not the same.
And this is a real problem I'm seeing. Is very good for everybody who's coming. It's very good for the business. It's very good for restaurants, for everyone. But locals, they will be facing problems unless we want to go inland.
Yeah, there's a big extreme point is in Ibiza, for example. If you read the news in Ibiza.
Yeah, we hear even police officers,
waiters and nurses and exactly something like that. So, wow, that's a lot. That's a very extreme point. But obviously, there are some other areas that it's not happening the same, because it's not. But obviously, something that is.
But the island certainly, Mallorca also has a major problem.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And it's difficult to know because we've seen seen a lot of demonstrations and people, well, even in Barcelona, squirting water at tourists. And there are some areas where they're trying to say to tourists, look, it's not you, it's the model. It's the tourism model. I mean, how soon are we going to perhaps see something change there, for instance? Is it more of a one side of the house or the other? Are the socialists so we more likely to do something about it? They've been in power for a while. Or are the PP if they get back in? We don't know.
We don't know.
I mean, at the end, the tourism industry will go ahead, obviously, because at the end, this area of Spain has a big tourism industry. Yeah. They will have to guide and conduct and put some limits. Obviously, the demand is higher and higher and higher. They are going to increase the airport, they're going to increase the hospital, they're going to increase everything.
2 new runways
to attract more tourists. Next, they're going to attract more tourists. But obviously about the property, because obviously about investing in a property and let it is going to be always a good business. But always would be some rules in order to identify what kind of property is identified in order to do that or not. Yeah.
It's very hard to put limits to the high demand.
Well, we also have the issue where regions can make their own decisions outside of what overall government control is as well. And I think generally housing tends to become is part of that, isn't it? It's not part of central government.
No, the local town halls have the power to control this license.
So it comes down even further.
Yeah. And but as you said, the airport is big in Alicante. I don't know how many millions we are having.
Well, we know the Transport Minister was just talking the other day about an extra runway at both of the main airports in Costa Blanca, North, Valencia and Alicante.
So that will bring more people. And unfortunately or fortunately, it will be more demand, which is good for X amounts of business. But for another, we'll be facing people. Where do I buy now? I mean, let's say just middle class that they are locals. I think they will be ending to buy a property inland, because inland you don't have any issues. Or
central government's trying to get people to move back inland, haven't they? Maybe it's part of a big plan. I don't know. But of course, the thing that happens there is, though, if you can't support the amount of visitors that the coastal areas have or the big cities have, because people can't afford to live there, that support those restaurants, for instance, and those bars and those businesses, then you've got a big issue.
It's a big issue. I agree. It's a big issue. But yes, there is a plan. I mean, there is some town halls inland that they are promoting, come here for free, you don't pay EB, you don't pay this, you don't pay the other. And I think everything at the end of the day, it gets stable and it regulates, but I don't think it will stop. I really think the growth is there. People are willing to come to Costa Blanca, and I don't see going backwards. I think it's pretty much impossible.
The demand is increasing and will be increasing year by year.
Pedro, you did talk about a potential ceiling, but where and when might that be? Nobody can know.
At the end, I don't know. We have to make like better filters in order to attract better clients, like better tourists in this case. I mean, they talk about tourists. How much do they spend every day, for example, on average? With the end, they will have to be attracted some kind of. You say the model. What kind of model we want to?
For a long time, the islands, certainly the Balearic Islands, have been wanting to attract a better class of tourists. Let's face it, some of the places on the islands you really wouldn't want to go on a holiday because of the way that the tourists act there. But this is actually changing that now anyway.
Exactly.
But there are other things that are happening, aren't there? We've seen Barcelona, we've seen Valencia City talking about limiting the amount of properties available for the likes of Airbnb. And from what we understand, most properties that have the ability to let, the contract lasts for 5 years. Is that pretty much right across?
Well, licenses for tourists, license. Well, let me explain. A rental contract could be a long term, which is nothing to do with a license or tourist license. You don't need a tourist license to rent your property in a long-term contract. You don't even need it to like a temporary contract. A temporary could be also for holidays, really. I mean, for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 1 month and a half. It's a temporary contract. You do not do it in a digital platform. Do you just not advert in a digital platform? Do you just not do the services like if it were a hotel, for example? And then we have the rentals for touristic license, which is an advert in digital platforms, and you do some kind of services like cleaning, like guests, like attracting the guests, giving the keys, leaving the keys, and be able to give service to them while they are on holidays. That is different. There are big cities, for example, Barcelona, you have also mentioned. people is buying properties and letting rooms. Which is also is going to be a nightmare for some buildings that people live like families, for example. For that, but it's happening right now in big cities in Madrid and Barcelona. So those regions that obviously in Valencia, Comunidad Valenciana is 5 years. Okay, I mean if there's some limits, obviously that authorization will end until these 5 years. In case it's a limit, in case it's rejected for after that. But I don't think will happen that. I mean, will be some guidance in order to limit new ones, even though we'll be increasing anyway, but we'll put some limits. Maybe the properties will say, okay, properties will have to have these requirements, and then will be lower properties to be updated to that.
Oh, I see. So if you change the requirements, that means a number of properties might not actually fit the bill. So it's a straightforward way of dealing with that. Yeah. How would we know what sort of things that they might use?
Because, I mean, at the beginning, as I said, for example, I'm putting the example of Alicante, they said, okay, we need 11,000 more rooms. Oh, wow, that's a lot for a small city. Okay, let's put the ground floor, which is like shops, commercials, to be able to have a touristic license for tourists. Without windows, without that, I mean, it's like a little bit... and then, but obviously, they need to put some limits. So that kind of properties probably will be limited. Or other kind of properties in different neighborhoods, for example, it's a residential neighborhood. You will not be allowed to do that. I mean, in some regions, some neighborhoods, they will allow it. Some ones not. Maybe the property is too small. Maybe the property is too big. I don't know. But they will have to put some limits in order to reduce the number of new licenses.
The amount of, I mean, there are some ways which this can happen.
But the long term is still there. So people still let's put it this way: people who bought properties in Spain and now are saying, "Oh my goodness, I'm going to lose all these income."
But are they though? We don't want to worry anybody here. That if you've got an existing tourist license for your apartment,
the way it could come, if it comes, this is like golden visa. We don't know, do we? But the way it could come is that we were discussing about having 3/5 of the community asking now to increase the community fees because you are.
So if you're in, say, a complex,
in a condo, yes,
buildings,
yes,
so
only that.
That sort of community.
That sort of community, they are entitled to do an AGM, and if 3/5 agree.
Of the owners
agree to increase. I find it sometimes unfair because if you use the flat, you use it anyway. But if you do a business, then they could increase your 20%. If you live in a ground floor, I don't use a lift. So what more expensive? So I could. But anyway, just trying to understand why. But they are entitled to increase that. So far, they cannot prohibit the activity unless it's written down on the bylaws and the statutes, or if they change the statutes, it's 100% agreed. So all the people
owners
allowed to vote are able to do it.
Okay.
But we don't know if I think Sumar is trying to change the law so the community of owners have more power and could prohibit.
We certainly had a news story about that recently, and I think that one was Valencia. Although, like I said, we keep hearing lots of different stories from lots of different areas, but the idea really was that people within, say, an apartment complex, the owners could decide whether not even to allow that sort of activity.
No, that's. I mean, the rules are made by the municipalities, by the region, Comunidad Valenciana, or different regions. But the rules cannot be changed by the community of owners like that. I mean, as Ignacio said, if you want to change that, you need a 100% owners agreement on eliminate that kind of business or activity in the community of owners, or 3/5 in case that you want to increase 20%, maximum 20% of the fees of that specific owner.
There is two issues here I will call it. Is one, you being entitled to have the license if you're going to do touristic. If not, you do short term, as Pedro said, or long term, which is legal, as you don't have an issue.
You make a short term, you contract a estate agent, they contact with their clients.
That's right.
And they don't need Airbnb, they don't make a service
agent.
Like a hotel. That's all.
Yeah,
you do.
That's one issue that you need to face.
A short-term let you can do for 6 months, or maybe even what's the shortest period?
No, you could do it also for 2 weeks time.
Yeah, okay.
And holidays. It's a holiday.
We've always done that in the summertime.
Yeah,
you rent
that's right.
for 2 weeks.
It's very common. It's been not very common. I mean,
And then you need to face the license, and now this is bringing a new issue, the community. This is something to look into. So if you're doing an investment now, trying to buy a property, there is two things that on the due diligence your lawyer will do, right? One will be checking that you're able or entitled to apply for a license. Two, whether you are able or not to get the agreement from the community.
Talking to Pedro and Ignacio from AlicanteLawyers.es, and we're talking about the buy-to-let situation. We know that, as we mentioned, a few little issues in the pipeline at the moment, but if you do your due diligence and get your lawyer to address those things at the outset, then you shouldn't be worried at all about buying property to let in Spain. Let's get that clear.
Yeah. Let's get it that clear. I mean, buying a property in Spain is safe. And the only thing you need to do the due diligence and know what you're doing. If you are buying a property to let, just make sure that you know the bylaws of the community, if you have a community, or the regulations of the town hall and the limits to that model. But there are more models, which is short-term rentals and long-term rental.
Right. Okay.
Exactly. It is like when you make a due diligence or someone wants to buy a property and there is no swimming pool, but they have a dream to build a swimming pool. They have a project to build a swimming pool. Obviously, the due diligence needs to be said, okay, let's check if you can build a swimming pool.
If it's allowed, actually.
If it's allowed, because maybe it's not.
Yeah.
So it is like the same in order to check, this is your intention, this is your project, this is your investment to let, and this kind of letting. So let's check before you buy, let's check before you pay. We normally, the process of buying a property, you start paying a small deposit, then you pay 10%, and then you pay the rest, no? Before paying the 10%, before paying the big amount, then that due diligence is to be made.
Okay. It's still a great investment, housing, anywhere in the world, but certainly
absolutely.
along Spain's Mediterranean coast right now. There are good percentages to be made. In fact, probably better than in a number of other areas where you might invest.
Absolutely. I mean, we are talking, there is the Airbnb, for example, or the legends are in touristic license. Are getting a fortune at the end. I mean, there's a big business, really. Big business, which is good.
Well, I mean, you're charging for a week what you might charge a month.
Exactly.
For certain
that's
properties.
right.
Exactly.
That's
It's a good business. People is obviously investing on that, which is good. I mean, it's fine. It's good. It's really good.
Yeah.
Okay. The other question on this, we brought this up in the break, was the issues about the golden visa. But again, whatever happens with that, there are still ways. So that's also not something to worry about too much. It
Correct.
Depends which way do you go down the road?
Yeah, actually, at the moment it's still legal and it's still happening, and we are processing a lot of golden visas still. But there is always an option. You've got the non-lucrative visa. The only requirement is that you need to be more than 6 months with that kind of visa. But for someone who's going to stay here more than 6 months, is not an issue.
So, say American expat retiring, from the US to Spain, that's ideal, really.
Yes,
Exactly.
Yeah,
That's
it wouldn't really affect.
Because it really changes. It changes to those ones who wants to get back and forwards into Spain and Schengen area without being resident and without being tax resident. On those ones, we have the rule of 90 or 180 days.
180, yeah. Okay, right. Well, so it's not a bad thing then, and we're working out that you found the property that you want. You get the due diligence done by a respectable lawyer, and when what happens next when it comes to letting? How you have to find the body, I guess, the person or the agency that you want to work with.
Well, before if you're really aiming to buy the property to let, my recommendation is to instruct the lawyer from the very beginning, because if
That's your intention.
That intention before you ever commit yourself to any contract, because why will you buy something if you're not going to get a license, right? But again, that license will last X amount of time, and then you need to make sure that the license will be granted and that the community will allow you to do so. Once you bought the property, you complete it, and then you're able to rent it. You could do the 3 models: touristic, short-term rental contract through your lawyer as well, or long-term rental contract. The long-term rental contract, the only difference is that gives more rights to the tenant, and the tenant could stay there longer than with the different models. The number 2 model, which is the short terms, cannot, and the touristic cannot. So it is a different model of renting property, which is being always here, and I think that's not an issue. The short term and the long term will always be here, and is legal, and is the other one, it really requires the license and probably the community's So yeah, your lawyer will be able to represent on that, Carl.
On long-term rentals, for instance, there are some issues like perhaps non-payment and things like that. Is there a way to deal with that
That's a good
illegally in
question.
Spain?
It is. I mean, obviously, in a proceeding, always in order to obviously reject tenants out of the property, and this has happened a lot. Obviously, there are many rumors on this about Ocupa as well. How is it in
that's
English?
squatters.
Squatters.
Yeah. We talked before about Ocupas.
Yeah, Ocupas. And when someone obviously is a tenant that has started the property, and the property is a permanent home really of that tenant, and stops paying you the rent, obviously there is a rapid, we call it express, proceeding in order to claim the eviction. The other situations is really when some property is empty, the property is someone enters on the property and says that is my property, says this is I'm living here, so I'm ocupación is like a then.
Just having an alarm system isn't
then
always...
there's obviously...
Alarm system you've got to have, right?
Yeah.
We made a webinar. We've been informing about that many times. Obviously, you have a right to the nose, and the police should put them out rapidly. And if it's not, the police will be there in the court. It is like if you go to the police station and says, "Oh, someone has robbed my car," and the police sees the car and is going to put the robber people out or will put it in jail, and the car will give it back to you rapidly. With the property, it should be something like that, and in many occasions it is like that. But sometimes tenants they lie to the police. They say I'm living here many days. I'm living here many.
Professional occupiers.
They bring.
It's the horror stories you hear about.
Yes,
exactly.
Professionals.
They bring like a contract. They say, "Oh, this is a contract I signed." Obviously, it's lie. And obviously, you need to put some more effort on that.
Okay, all right. What about mortgages to buy to let in Spain? You know, we know that different banks offer different things. I guess it's really about the right fit for the person who's buying. Yeah.
Well, normally banks will grant you if you have collateral, but for non-residents, they might grant you 60% of the valuation, but they want to see that you're able and capable to pay off the mortgage. So that's one thing. As a model, if you're going to buy a lot of them and then do it with a bank, then they will need to see whether you're able to pay. They don't really like too much speculations and be part of that and you running away. When you are a non-resident, that's why they give only 60%. But I'm talking about if you're doing individual mortgages, not as a company. As a company is always a bit more difficult.
Yeah, I think we're generally talking about individuals.
Individuals, okay. Well, individuals, I would say you're buying a property, if you have enough money as collateral to support the mortgage, they will grant 60%. You always need to budget for the other 40% and the other 12% average. So I always say you need to have budget that money for the expenses, transfer tax, notary fees, register fees, and solicitors' fees. I normally quote always to budget aside 12 to 13%, depending on the expenses. But yes, banks will allow you to do it. You don't really need to tell them that it's to rent because probably you will leave X amount of time and you will rent it. That's what people do when they're out. This is the typical thing.
At the end of the banks, you need to show them that you have a capability to pay back whatever is agreed here.
Types of property came up while we were talking in the break there. And there are advantages to buying a cheaper property and doing it up, yeah?
Sure. You could always find a good deal and refurbish it, buy it through an auction procedure, buy a cheap deal, refurbish it and rent it out or sell it on. So that one is not going to stop. That type of model is that buy-to-let investment property or just buy, refurbish and sell. I think that there is not an issue
there's
at
a lot
all.
of clients doing that. That's right.
And probably you just don't deal with the tenants and you buy a good deal, refurbish it a little bit or whatever you think is best and sell it on. The only thing you need to be careful with is the tax planning with that.
Right, and this is where we were saving the dirty word till last. Taxes. So buy to let in Spain, good idea. there are some pitfalls, like there might be in anywhere where you would buy to let, but not insurmountable. And if you have a reputable lawyer to deal with your property, then you're going to be all right. But how much are you going to pay on your investment?
Okay, well, for an investment, it depends when if you are European or non-European resident. It means that if you are living, for example, in the United States, and a Spanish which is living, for example, in the United States, is renting a property in Spain, is treated like a non-resident out of a European Union, union, and therefore will pay 24% for the gross amount. 24%.
So what we call non-resident third country.
Correct.
Which Britain has had to get used to.
Yes,
Exactly. Britain is exactly the same. You are resident. If you are any citizen, but you are living and resident in the UK. If you are a UK citizen that is living in Spain, that's change. That will be a different issue, obviously, depending on and depending if it's a long term or if it's short term. So that we have some benefits or not. And also, there is one thing that we also inform to clients when they are buying new properties, because when you buy a new property, you pay value-added tax. In Spain, is 10%. But if you wanted to say, I want to buy the property and let it on a touristic license, but I want to leave it to some company because I want to. This is an activity, and I'm not going to live there. I'm going to leave this property to some company in order to use it permanently for a year. Everything. Then you will be able to recover. You will be able to recover value-added tax.
Okay, that's
sometimes can be a lot of money. Also, you have to stay that kind of business during 10 years, because if you sell a property before, you have to pay back to the tax office a pro-rate amount of what you have received. Which is clients, they do that. They understand the business. They understand they can leave this property. It's not, well, when I mean leave, is just to give the keys to some company. They have a deal. They rent it, and the company rents it. They get a business, and they get some fee. And they also charge value tax to the company, but they recover the value tax of, which is 10%. Imagine a property of 300,000 euros is 30,000 euros, and with all the clients we made these calculations, and in long term, obviously, is benefit. Is benefit a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could talk about different type of taxes. Pedro said the non-resident tax, which is the 24% gross. If you are a resident in Spain, doesn't matter about nationality, then it's a sliding scale and two models. If we're talking about touristic, then you have no allowance. So it's income minus expenses. The total is your marginal rate. So you will pay whatever is your sliding scale around the world. Okay, so your growth in general. If we're talking about long-term rental properties, you have a big allowance, and I always say it's very attractive in Spain so far. We could always say so far, do long-term rentals, because 60% of your net is tax-free. So you're only taxable on your 40% of your net. So that means income minus expenses, all the expenses of the property. That what it makes the total, and the 40% is taxable.
So quite a lot more desirable than perhaps a different way of renting.
Is what do you mean?
Having a long-term
is tax efficient.
And actually, as we know,
it's tax efficient.
Lots of people are looking for long-term rentals too.
Yeah, and it's tax efficient, and it's been always very good.
Yeah.
And at the moment, it is good. But the thing with it, renting property, Carl, is people sometimes. Is a lot of like the magistrate in the High Court in Madrid, Vicente Magro, was saying, is a mixture of things together. The long-term rentals, you don't worry, hopefully, tax efficient. But if you need to evict, you need to deal with something different, which is the eviction, which is another issue that sometimes you don't want. The short-term rental, I think, is always good because of the type of contract you could have. More penalty clauses to the tenants if they are in breach of contract.
More for the owner's advantage, perhaps.
More for the owner's advantage. But it's not that profitable as the touristic apartment. Touristic apartment, you have to deal with no tax allowances. And now the problem with the community, if possible, the community or the town hall. So everything has an angle. You know, all of them, all the models are good. But you need to face different issues.
Yeah. And lastly, it's those who are non-residents but are residents in a European Union country, then will be 19% of a net amount.
The net, which is even better.
Net amount. So non-resident living in outside the European Union, 24% gross. And if you are resident in a European Union country, as a non-resident in a European Union country, is 19% of a net amount.
Now, we do actually have quite a lot of Northern European EU countries, people buying in this area at the moment. It's
That's right.
a major increase. So it's worthwhile, whichever way that you do it. And obviously, with everything, there are some pitfalls here and there, but you need to get yourself properly informed to get some proper advice. AlicanteLawyers.es is the website. That webinar coming up there in around about half an hour's time. The guy's going to hot foot it up the road to be on camera for that. Actually, I saw you setting up on one of those webinars recently. On one of the featured videos that Moody made. Ignacio. Great to talk to you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great summer.
We'll see you in September.
And we'll look forward to
Have a great summer, everyone.